Good evening, everyone. Welcome, Your Excellency, Ambassador of Brazil, our distinguished guests from Training Vision, and our honored audience members to SMU. It is with great pleasure that I'm able to welcome Professor Claudia Costin to Singapore Management University. She is the founder and director of SAFE. I will translate it as the Center for Excellence and Innovation of Education Policies. It is claimed to be a think and do think within the Getulio Vargas Foundation, which is a leading university in Brazil. She has been a visiting professor in Harvard in the Graduate School of Education and was most recently a senior director in the World Bank for Global Education. Before joining that, she was in government. She was Secretary of Education of the Municipality of Rio de Janeiro. And under her stewardship, she has done great things for the world of education. I would ask you now then to join me in welcoming Professor Costin on stage.
Thank you. And here, yeah. Oh, or here. Okay. So, good afternoon, almost good evening, everyone. It is a real pleasure to be here with you. I've never been to Singapore before, and in the last days, I've been getting to know your society, and I discovered that you share with my country an important feature, which is sense of humor. Yes, that you are hardworking people, very committed to your country and to your future, and I envy you for that. I wish we are able to have the same hardworking passion, that you have the same grit, but you share with us a good sense of humor and warmness. So thank you for SMU and to Training Vision for inviting me to be here. And I will bring some perspectives, not only from my country, but from the developing world, on the challenges of education, but especially in a context where we are discussing the future of education, or the so-called fourth industrial revolution. What will happen to this part of the world, the developing countries, with the artificial intelligence, automation, and job extinctions that come with it, and what kind of education will be in need. So I start with something that was defined in September of 2015. I was part of the process in my World Bank position, discussing the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically the SDG 4, the fourth Sustainable Development Goal, which is to ensure inclusive and quality education for all and promote lifelong learning. It sounds like diplomatic language, but it means a lot. If you remember properly, the Millennium Development Goals that were established by the end of 1999 and were established to be achieved till 2015, they were saying just let's ensure that all children get access to primary. So to ensure that every kid, young children, would go to primary. Now it's much more than that. We are talking about not only about access, I'm going to show you later that it's also about conclusion, and not only about primary, but up till the end of upper secondary or high school, as the Americans say, And it's not only about having schooling, but also learning. So quality education for the 194 countries that signed this objective, that goal, means having good learning outcomes. So I decided to translate this into the targets that were created to turn it into action. There are more than 20, but so I just brought 3 to give you an idea. So one of them is that we will ensure that till 2030, we would ensure that all girls and boys, and this distinction, boys and girls, is very important, will complete free, equitable, and quality primary and secondary education, leading to relevant and effective learning outcomes. There is a very interesting report that was delivered by the end of last year from the World Bank called, the World Development Report called The Learning Crisis, where they state that in the developing world, finally kids are at school in most countries, with some few exceptions. Pakistan has not yet achieved that. They increased the numbers in an impressive way, but not yet everybody, every child and adolescents are in schools. Nigeria has an issue with that, Afghanistan naturally. But even in those countries, in Afghanistan, the numbers of girls that were out of school and that are finally in schools is impressive. But, says the report, they are not learning. If you look at India, for example, there are reports that show Acer has been researching learning in India, and unfortunately, figures are horrible, horrible. Kids, when you assess learning, they are definitely not learning, especially in rural India. On the other hand, progress in access is very important. So we promised that even in the developing world, 194 countries, including my own country, had promised that we would ensure that every boy and girl would conclude secondary. So let me tell you something about Brazil. Brazil, in the 30s, in 1930, we had only 21.5% of the kids in schools, in primary. Korea was just next to us. They had 22% of the kids in school, in primary. At that time, Argentina had 62% and Chile had 73%. Then, by the end of the 60s, Korea had already every kid in primary, and we had only 40% of the kids in primary. Which means that the school I went to, and when we look back, we said, oh, the good school was the school of the end of the 60s. Yes, because it was only the kids of the affluent families and the kids of educated parents that were going to school. So it's easy to have quality education, or at least it's easier to have quality education when you're teaching the kids of educated parents. The challenge begins in the 90s, when finally, in 1997, we had every kid in primary. And then, finally, people from vulnerable population went to school. And school was not fit for purpose at that context, because we had to very quickly hire great numbers of teachers, that were not necessarily got the best preparation to teach kids that had much more challenges than the kids that studied at my time. So this is one of the specific targets. Another one is that by 2030, we would ensure that boys and girls have access to quality early childhood development care and pre-primary, so that they are ready for primary education. Heckman, the Nobel Prize laureate, one of his studies shows that kids that have had access to quality early childhood education, not only they perform much better in school, but you avoid crime. They had better salaries later in life. They have so a healthy life, not wealthy, not only wealthy, but healthy life if they have quality early childhood care and education. And also he mentioned that it's the most efficient investment in education, working with early ECD, as we call it. How does the developing world stand vis-a-vis this target? Okay, 2030 is in 12 years, or a little bit less than 12 years. Where do we stand on that? Well, that's even more challenging than the previous target, because when we talk about early childhood development and not only education, it means that we need to ensure that parents got the appropriate preparation to be loving to their children. Research has shown that the synapses of the brain happen when kids feel protected and loved. So it's not only about teaching vocabulary to young children, it's also teaching them that they are loved, they are protected, that they shouldn't live under toxic stress. And when we deal with vulnerable children, children that live in war contexts, and poverty and wars come hand in hand, unfortunately, or in violent slums, like we have in Rio, for example, in the city where I live, it's very hard to talk about not letting kids be in toxic stress. Because if there are for example, two drug dealing gangs competing for the business of drug dealing, then it's difficult to have an appropriate childhood, what to say about early childhood. But it implies also that we have to have quality pre-primary and quality early childhood centers. So it's challenging, but it's something that we have agreed to achieve by 2030. And the third one that I brought for our discussion is that we have agreed as the world that by 2030, we would substantially increase the number of youth and adults who have relevant skills, including technical and vocational skills, for employment, decent jobs, and entrepreneurship. To have the appropriate set of skills means that we have to improve the quality of basic education, or what is called K-12 education, so that they would provide the appropriate skills, but also means that we would look at the technical and vocational education field, so that kids don't just look at universities as the only option for progressing or obtaining a good job or a decent job, and they consider other kind of vocational education. But it also means that adults that for any reason have left school and not gone to universities, they can go back. There are means to continue their study because, as you remember in the first on the first slide, there was a mention to lifelong learning. And lifelong learning, normally when we talk about lifelong learning, we think about just adult education. For example, adults that are illiterate, that they may learn to read and write after they are adults, or that they may obtain technical skills and so on. But lifelong learning is a journey that starts in early childhood. I'm saying this because if you don't teach children, since they are very young, that they can learn to learn, as Jacques Delors would say. Jacques Delors was one of the builders of the European Union and was responsible later for a very interesting report from UNESCO stating that education is about 4 pillars. And he was writing this just after the Union was established, and he was saying that the inhabitants of the world should learn to learn, be able to be lifelong learners, learn to be, being comfortable with their own identity, learn to live together, and learn to do or to make, to work. I just want to stop there to comment on learn to be vis-a-vis, learn to live together. If you remember what happened in Europe after the 2 wars of the 20th century, when they realized that they have defined their national identities in opposition to the identities of other countries. So nationalism arose in wars against other countries. For example, I am French, so I know that I'm French because I hate Germans, for example, or the other way around. I'm German, and I'm German because I built my identity in the Franco-Prussian Wars. So nationalism was built in wars against other countries. And now we have to build a healthy identity. I'm French, I'm proud of my origin, but I don't need to hate Germans because of that. I learned to live together with other identities. So being tolerant is part of building a global citizenship. I don't know if you get my point. And this is very important for the developing world, because in the developing world, in parts of the developing world, certainly in some countries in Africa, identities were the building of the national or the tribal identity was during civil wars or horrible wars that unfortunately till now in some countries do still exist. But having said that, let me talk a little bit about the challenges that the developing world is facing when they look to the future, when we look to the future. So, one of them I have mentioned in the beginning of my explanation, which is the fact that with the so-called fourth industrial revolution, automation and robotization, artificial intelligence, is extinguishing job posts. Well, you might say, well, it's extinguishing job posts, but the Industrial Revolution did the same. And it's not that a nightmare happened. A nightmare happened for a while because, yes, new job posts will be created, but there is a transition or a transitional time while those posts are extinguished and new posts are created, and the new jobs won't be for the same people or for the same competences or skills. Let me just give some examples, some important examples. During the Industrial Revolution, lots of manual work was substituted by machines. Now, it's not about manual work only, it's about intellectual work. So journalism is being completely reshaped in our era. First, because magazines are managed by the online. Well, this is good for the environment. We are not putting down so many trees. There are some advantages to it. But there is another issue. Now we have algorithms that you insert just some data there, and a narrative will come. So is this the end of journalism? Certainly not. But of many job posts, yes. If you look at firings in the press right now, all over the world, journalists are being dismissed. Some journalists, the ones that have the ability to analyze data, to have a more systemic view, are still there. But they don't need so many journalists. Let me go to another example. On the autonomous cars, the semi-autonomous car or the autonomous cars that are already being tested in the streets in many countries. In my country, there is a huge fight between taxis and Ubers. In many countries, this is a reality. Guess what? In a few years, they won't be fighting anymore because both will be out of jobs. Is this amazing in a sense? Yes, because can you imagine, I don't like to drive, can I imagine sitting on a car, just saying to the car, go to that place, not having to chat about politics with a taxi driver. In Argentina, not only in my country, I had a very interesting experience I was talking about some specifics on education with a colleague that is a researcher of education. And all of a sudden, the taxi driver began to explain his views about education to us. And we were, discussing with... But it was our conversation, my conversation with my colleague was very important. I don't want to blame the taxi driver, but we were having a private discussion on research on education. The taxi driver was giving his views. So probably it will be more comfortable with the autonomous car, but many people would lose jobs. Just to give you a few examples of what I'm saying. It sounds funny or futuristic, but there is an issue there. Those people will lose jobs. And are they ready for more challenging positions? Probably not. Going ahead, another risk. And let me tell you something. Yes, we are here in a developed country. And you might be thinking, how come I'm talking about the developing countries facing the same challenges? Technology is not so well developed in the developing countries. So how come I'm talking about this? There is another risk associated with this that we call reshoring. What is reshoring? The companies that are right now producing in these countries, the international companies, it might become cheaper for them to go back home and automate the whole process than having to depend on a workforce that, yes, it's still cheaper than the workforce back home, but is increasingly getting unionized or having, getting to know that they have some labor rights and so on. So what might happen to many countries is that companies move away, so less job posts will be ready. This is a risk, definitely so. Can it be faced or reduced? I also believe it can. Through education, but not only through education, with consistent public policy addressing those things. Another issue that in my country is particularly complicated is that we have the productivity, labor productivity is stagnated, and at the same time we have a demographic bonus that is rapidly fading. What is the demographic bonus? The fact that we have a bigger population that is at working age, a working age population that is bigger than the ones that depend on that working population. We are not yet, Brazil, Argentina, an aging society, as you are, as Japan is, and we are not yet there. But in 12 years, this we will become. The fertility rate per woman is 1.33, the same as in France. This data was delivered 4 months ago by our Institute of Statistics, and I was amazed. This is much below reposition rate. 2 adults have 2 children, for example. That would be reposition rate. For technical reasons, it's 2.1 reposition rate. And we are much below. And we think we are a young country. So if you combine the two, the rapidly fading with the stagnated productivity at a low level, we are in for trouble because we need to be very productive to be able to afford the children and old age people. Let's see how we will face that. And this is true also for Argentina, not so quickly as us, but for Argentina, for Chile, and for other countries in Latin America, for example. Another risk that I promise that I won't speak about politics in Brazil since we were having elections in a few days, 28th of October, it's our second round. But I will talk about a phenomenon that is happening all over the world. The fact that in the developed and in the developing world as well, we are facing a challenge of fragile citizenship and institutions that do not respond as strongly as expected to the possibility of populism, of governments. If I were to summarize what is populism, is governments or candidates that speak to the people as if they were children, and citizens that believe that this is the right thing to do. This is the strong man that is going to kill all the robbers and will make us feel safe. That's a quick summary of populism. And And it doesn't matter if it is from the extreme right or the extreme left, the results are exactly the same. So we are not in for healthy democracies if we don't face this problem. And finally, as I mentioned, based on that report, the WDR, the World Development Report from the World Bank, it is a huge risk that students are, children and youth are finally at schools, but are not learning. And let me give you some data from Latin America to illustrate what I'm saying. Just a quick comment. So we are facing a challenge that is, at the same time as we are dealing with the urgent need to address the fact that, that with the fourth industrial revolution, we will have a big risk for jobs, we are not yet dealing with the 20th century school. So this should be addressed by the 21st century schools or skills demanded for the 21st century, but yet we are not teaching basic literacy and numeracy as we should in the developing world. Let me show you some data about that. Hanushek has said, and that, let me go back to a principle, an important principle. Eric Hanushek, a very important economist that studies education from Stanford, he says that just access to school does not ensure economic growth. If you want to have long-term growth, you have to make sure that the quality of the based on learning outcomes is good. And this is not the case in Latin America. And when he wrote about that, he compared Latin America with East Asia. This specific country, Singapore, is #1 in PISA. And he based himself on PISA rankings to show that most of the countries in this side of the world are performing greatly in PISA, and you have had a consistent growth and development. And he compares this region with Latin America, showing exactly that we don't have a high growth or a sustainable growth just because we aren't putting enough effort in the quality of our education. But I'm not talking about contemporary education or skills for the future, just the basic skills that a normal school would demand. And quality matters a lot to deal with productivity, with the stagnated productivity. And another issue that appears in the World Bank report is that dropout rates are huge and are related to lack of interest in classes, not only because of young people do not leave school just because they want to work. They leave schools because they are not interested or they feel that what they are learning is not relevant for their future lives, which tells a lot about our systems. And curricula is irrelevant for the skills demanded for employability or even entrepreneurship. So we learn a lot of grammar, just to give you an example, but we don't learn a lot about how we could have the pleasure of reading books, of learning to interpret what we are reading newspapers, being able to be a citizen in the sense of, on one side, being able to understand the promises of the politicians, on the other side, appreciating literature and arts. Okay, now I can go to Latin America. Data from PISA 2015. So as I have posted there, the region is positioned at the bottom third of the PISA ranking. If you divide the PISA ranking in 3, we are at the bottom. We have achieved some important things. Let me give you some data on Brazil, for example. Now we have every kid in primary. Completion rate in primary is okay. In secondary, in lower secondary, we have most of the kids in lower secondary. Completion rate is not perfect in lower secondary, but that in what you call pre-university courses, then young people disappear. It's not that they completely disappear, but we are not in great numbers there. And it's an issue when you do not complete upper secondary, because there is a research done by a Colombian called Guillermo Peri that shows that if girls do not complete upper secondary, you do not interrupt the intergenerational transmission of poverty. So the next generation will be poor if the girls are unable. It's the girls, sorry for the men here, but what matters in the education of children is mostly related to women. This is research, it's not me, nothing against you. This is, we have had greater inclusion in the region, in all countries, and the committing of the countries to improving learning, and this has to be highlighted. Chile, in Latin America, has the best performance in science within the region, followed by Uruguay, Trinidad, Tobago, and Costa Rica. Costa Rica is a small country, Trinidad, Tobago is a small country, and Uruguay is a small country. I have to be a little bit more generous with my own country. We have 204 million inhabitants and a country that is the size of a continent, very diverse, but I'm very saddened by the fact that Brazil, it's not even at the top of the bottom third. Compared to the OECD average, the region scores are compared to 2.5 years less of schooling. So it's not just scores, oh, what are scores? But if you remember well, PISA is a test that is applied to young people when they are 15 from participating countries. We have participated, Brazil has participated since day one in the PISA, since 2000 in the PISA, but we haven't performed well. We are among 70 countries that have authorized, or 70 economies that have authorized OECD to deliver their data. We, the 8th country in GDP, not GDP per capita, but GDP, we are the 66th in mathematics, 63rd in science, and 59th in reading and understanding. Just to remember you that PISA measures the 3 skills. In mathematics, the ability to reason mathematically, not to know by heart the formula of Bhaskara or you name it. In science, the development of a research-oriented kind of mind, which is a basis for all sciences, and in language, yes, reading and understanding. So compared to the OECD, the region scores are equivalent to 2.5 years less so I have already said that. And Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, and Peru obtain results equivalent to 3 years less of schooling than the OECD. It's as if we have studied 3 years less. It's amazing. The Dominican Republic is the worst case in PISA. So what are the main problems that we face in education? First, we have a big difficulty to attract talent to the teaching profession. The idea would be to have the top students from secondary school wanting to become teachers, but they don't. For two reasons. First, the salaries are very low. It's not just about perceptions. They are effectively very low. The salaries have increased in Brazil, for example, but the salaries of other professions have increased even more. So this made the attractiveness of the career difficult, but also the social recognition of the profession is complicated. Second, teachers receive their pre-service education. Pre-service education is the education that you receive in university to prepare to become a teacher. In tertiary education, which is good, but on the other hand, the kind of education that is offered there doesn't prepare for the profession. It overly emphasizes theories of education. They teach future teachers, let's say future math teachers study 3.5 years of mathematics and then just 6 months history of education, sociology of education, philosophy of education. They don't learn how to teach. On the traditional teaching, and then we are talking about 21st century education already, the traditional teaching is not capturing students' interests. Just a teacher writing on a blackboard and students copying, it doesn't attract them. Is it the students' fault? I'm not sure. It needs to be much more engaging to deal with students like nowadays, and teachers are not prepared to do that, to teach in an engaging way. And this engagement is present in most secondary schools. High repetition rates. It's amazing. There is a public perception in Brazil that kids pass without learning. And this public perception is correct. But the reality is worse than that. Although students pass without learning, the repetition rates are really, really high. Why does this happen? Because their teachers don't learn in university to teach in a way that everybody learns. It's very important to promote excellence, but equity should be emphasized at the same time. Otherwise, education won't deliver on its promise, which is to establish equal opportunities for all. The real promise of capitalism and education within capitalism is that, okay, we offer equal opportunities and then each one tries to achieve to the best of their efforts. But if we start from different starting points, it's not meritocracy, it's completely unfair. And we don't emphasize equity enough in our systems, and low coverage of early childhood programs. So that's how we got there. Other problems is that technical education or technical schools have very low coverage. There is some prejudice against technical schools. Rich kids go to university, poor kids go to technical schools. But only 22% of Brazilians right now go to university. So when they finish their high school, the high school also overemphasizes academics, and they are not ready for any profession. So technical schools should be emphasized, not only in Brazil, in Peru, in Colombia, in Chile. We have very few hours of instruction in Latin America. 4 hours of instruction only, including lunch. So we are referring to 3 hours of instruction. Is that enough? Especially in this world where to compete with machines, you will have to teach young people to think, not only to act mechanically. Definitely not. When you talk about, for example, in my country, upper secondary, we have 13 mandatory subjects to be taught in 3 hours a day. So the curricula is encyclopedical, and you don't learn anything. You have what Edgar Morin, a great educator, would call the fragmentation of everything. And we need to tie those things together again. We have also prejudice against standards. In the medical profession, there are standards, protocols for teaching different illnesses. Why not in education? Why not having standards? But we are, in Latin America and Africa as well, prejudiced against standards. How do you teach a young person, a young deaf person, how to read? It demands some competences and some skilling for doing this. We are prejudiced. And little emphasis on experiential learning, on experimentation and problem-solving skills. One of the most important skills for the future of work is collaborative problem-solving skills. Teachers are not taught to collaborate among themselves, and teachers don't teach students to do it. Okay, and high education inequality. Having said that, I'm approaching the end of my presentation. Very quickly, what are the education trends for the future? And that I want my country, Argentina, Chile, and the countries in Africa to achieve. So first of them, focus in problem solving, in collective, creative problem solving. Machines are unable to do that. They can solve problems that are taught to them, but they cannot identify problems and build a process of collective or collaborative problem solving. Personalization. This is very interesting. If you don't want to have such a high repetition rate, you have to address the child or even the adult where he or she stands right now in her education deficits. Perhaps we were talking yesterday at Training Vision. When you have an adult getting educated, perhaps there are gaps in their education. How do you address those gaps without having to reteach everything that adult has learned in school. And even with a teenager, perhaps there are gaps in literacy, but perhaps not in literacy. Personalizing to the need of that specific child is possible if you use technology. The adaptive platforms allow you to identify the concrete needs of that specific person, which are different than that other ones, and without burdening the teacher, you can solve and fix that problem. Curricular flexibility. You don't need to teach everything to every child. You can address, especially use of different interests. Some young people are very interested in sports. Why not taking advantage of that and teaching mathematics and sports together? Teaching to read magazines devoted to sports, for example. I'm talking about a concrete example that I'm thinking. In Rio de Janeiro, we created schools for athletes because the clubs were taking them out of schools. So they have 4 public schools for the ones that are very good at sports, so that they can have time with sports and also with learning. 2 of them became very quickly the 2 best schools within the municipal system. Teaching just without entrance exam, just addressing the needs of athletes. Teaching to think. We use this expression, deep learning, for machine learning, but we should use this with human beings. Instead of teaching 13, 14 subjects, we need to go deep in some subjects and interdisciplinary areas. Today you were explaining to me how in the first year of undergraduate studies, you try to have some questions that could be addressed by different Professor Elvin was explaining to me, by different areas. Why not work with this approach? Mathematical reasoning, so teaching to think through using the tools from different areas. Another thing is, we talk a lot about social and emotional skills, but cognitive skills and social and emotional skills should be taught together. It's not a class on empathy. The teacher should show empathy when teaching history. The teacher should teach persistence while teaching mathematics. Teaching skills, grit, for example, while teaching sports or physical education. But the most important of all is student agency. There is a recent OECD report that emphasizes student agency as something that every school should teach. Instead of just pressuring kids, showing young people that they are the bearers of dreams. They have dreams for their future. And teaching them that they are responsible for building their dreams, and effort in school should come along with the notion that while at school you're preparing yourselves to build your dreams. And having a teacher that would be a mentor of this specific kid. Okay, so most of the skills to be developed for the future are connected to that. I won't spend time now because I'm running out of time, but emotional intelligence and empathy are things that machines do not have. So we are competing with machines right now. We are competing with robots. This is something we should work a lot in schools. Digital literacy, Yes, we have to learn. It's not only about digital literacy, but digital literacy should be worked much more in schools. Creativity. I don't want to mention how machines deal with creativity. Yes, they can produce a symphony from Beethoven if you insert Beethoven within the algorithm, but they cannot become the first Beethoven. But we can. We can become the first ourselves. Cooperation, problem solving, self-awareness and self-control. Kids learn that in school, but on the hard way. And this brings mental health problems, and suicide rates are up. You can teach them without putting them to so much pressure through intentionally teaching self-awareness and self-control. And student agency and lifelong learning skills, which means learning to learn. So what is, and I will skip some slides and just want to finalize with what is my utopia for the future. Utopia not in the sense of something that is impossible to happen, but what is my dream for my part of the world, for the developing countries? What is the school of the future that I dream for? First, a school where everyone learns. Everyone is able to learn. It's easy to teach the children saying, okay, I'm the teacher, I know everything. You study, you don't study, you fail the test and that's it. No, a student that would be able to ensure that everyone learns. In Finland, they have achieved it, so why not the developing world? A school that is not divorced from society. And this is important even in higher education. A school that is not divorced from society, that look at society's needs and say, well, I can prepare students that become citizens of their community in the first place and of the world as a whole. A school that is able to receive with flexible curricula the kids that have left school. I mentioned to you the huge dropout rates that we have in Latin America. They have to feel welcome back to school. A school that where both students and teachers work collaboratively. And let me pause here just 1 second to say, if a teacher believes that he or she is alone, is working, I close the door to my classroom and I do whatever I want to do, we are missing an opportunity to teach collaboration for students. So being able to collaborate, we teachers, and I started my career as adult education teacher, we need to be the role models of what we teach. Collaboration is one of the skills of the future. A school that teaches values and attitudes and not only content. And global citizenship connects to that. Not in the sense of a globalized world, but in the sense that we all share the same human condition. And that is what makes us human beings and not just machines. And a school where knowledge is not fragmented. Reality is not fragmented. Why should teaching be so fragmented? And a school that teaches how to think, and teaches and learns how to think. And a school that promotes student agents. Is this feasible? I'm not completely sure. But this is my utopia. This is what I what makes me wake up every day energized, thinking I want to change the world so that this kind of school might be possible. So thank you very much. I hope you have enjoyed. Just one final comment that I forgot to mention. We will have some time for questions and everything, but I'm sharing here my email so that if eventually in a question you are unable to, or you don't feel courageous enough to make a question, there is my email. But better than my email, I'm a Twitter addicted. I write every day only about education, science and technology and human rights on Twitter. And I respond very quickly because it's just 240 characters. It's easy to respond. Thank you.
Can I invite David and Kripal up on stage? So we have about 7 minutes for a very quick question and answer session. So I welcome you to be extremely courageous and efficient in posing your questions to Professor Costin.
Of the question of spirituality, or whatever it means to anyone, within the education system, is this something we should be encouraging, considering? How does that play out in the future of education, the sense of spirituality?
Spirituality? Yes. Well, I am a strong believer in the, I don't know how it translates here, laicity, in the sense of a school, public schools should not be religious, but that does not exclude spirituality, especially in the way I define spirituality, which is this, what is the history of humanity, if not the development of the spirit in the Heideggerian sense of the word. I believe in spirit, I believe in spirituality, and this is what develops empathy, the sense of belonging, and the sense of being ethical to one another. And also the idea that we need to become better human beings, each one of us. I read once a definition of jihad. Jihad, I'm not Muslim. Jihad normally people translate as sacred war against the enemies, but I translated, I read this translation, I loved it. It's your internal fight to become a better human being. And each one of us should be committed since birth to try to become a better human being.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Claudia Costin, for your presentation. I think when you were talking about agency, it made me, and promoting creativity, it made me think of another a great philosopher who is from Brazil, Paulo Freire, and he talked about the banker's model of education, where information is deposited into people's heads. But he also felt that education could liberate people rather than colonize people. And how do you see education being able to do that and encourage and empowering Brazilians as well as Latin Americans?
Oh, I'm so happy that I heard you mentioning Paulo Freire. For many reasons, I won't share the reasons right now. Yes, I think that what he said, for those of you who eventually don't know him, is that education should not be about depositing knowledge in your brain and then drawing it in tests and seeing if you already know by heart what you should be doing. It's about emancipating people. And how can it be achieved? First, the idea of teaching kids how to think will be one way. And if you look at student agency, and you use another word for student agents, which is protagonism. What is protagonism? Protagonism, in the movie, the protagonist is the most important actor. So if you teach young people that they can be the protagonists of their own lives, you are emancipating them. You remember the bearers of dreams that will build their own dreams. And I'm not talking about something that is unfeasible. I visited 3 weeks ago some schools in the Agreste. I don't know how to translate Agreste. Do you find a word for Agreste? In Pernambuco. It's a very dry area of Pernambuco. It's not the worst dry area, but it's an area that is very poor and very vulnerable, and they created a kind of high school where kids are taught to be protagonists. And they perform better, even in the subjects. It's not that we should replace knowledge by just some poetic approach. If you treat young people as people who could be trusted, they are bearers of dreams and they are protagonists in their own lives, and you support them in that, you are realizing, you are achieving Paulo Freire's dream of emancipating people.
I hate to be the harsh timekeeper, but the professor has a flight to catch at 11. Oh, right. On her request.
Sorry, just a quick question, just relating to that question too. Very quickly, I grew up here, experienced the education system here. I was fortunate enough to go to the States to experience the liberal arts education system. And the teacher in the States asked me, the first question in class was, "What's your perspective on this?" And I find myself, what's your perspective, what's your opinion on this? I find myself really struggling to answer that, because in Singapore, I was taught to answer questions. So I had answers, I had no opinions and perspectives. So that was interesting for me. And the reason why I say that is because the use of PISA testing, I wonder whether we are missing out the nuances of education. Are we missing out? You mentioned collaboration skills, agency, which I wonder whether PISA weighs heavily towards East Asian societies because we are educated to do tests. So I wonder whether it's should we hold that as a holy grail of truth, or should we take other tests to measure student achievement?
Okay, so first good news, OECD is preparing a test on social and emotional skills, because in a way or another, you need to measure things to know if you have achieved it. Because it's very easy in education to lie to ourselves, to think that we have achieved things that we haven't achieved. But having said that, just to complete the answer, it's much better to have an educated population than to have a population like in my country, where we are even unable to read books. So I don't want to be complacent with my own country. But you shouldn't be complacent with yours as well. You have achieved a lot, but you have to push to go even further. So the the collaborative skills, or even the possibility of answer with your own personal perspective, which is what I believe you have said, should be embedded in your system. So new goals for your system. Since you have achieved so much, you have to go even further. Challenge you to go much more and beyond what you have already achieved.
On that optimistic and resounding note, can you please join me to thank Professor Carsten for her great remarks?